Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's episode of Intuitive Angling. And man, I really appreciate you guys coming by the channel, spend some time with me and watch the video. Always grateful for that. And guys, have a really good video for you today. We're going to have a comprehensive discussion on driving a boat in rough water. It's not as easy as it sounds. Every type of rough water is different. What some people consider rough water is not rough. So we're going to talk about everything from safety to, a smooth ride to ensuring that you don't tear stuff up. There's a lot to it, and I have been in a ton of rough water, during my career, so we're going to get into that. And also, guys, if you hear me sniffling and sneezing, man, we are right in the middle of seasonal allergy season here in Missouri, and I am all stopped up here, so apologize for that before we get started. And also, guys, two quick housekeeping tips. Just wanted to remind you of the Father's Day sale on my Solar Bat Series RB2 and RB3 series sunglasses. If you get a pair before Father's Day, you can get them at 25% off. I'll put the Solar Bat link in the description. And also, please check out my Tackle Warehouse link in there. They've got their summer kickoff sale starting right now. So if you guys want to use those links, I put in the description. It's a good way to support the channel and get you some good deals on some equipment. Much appreciated. Okay, guys, I've spent a lifetime in rough water in a boat for the past 50 years. And one of the things about being a professional tournament angler, I've fished all over the world, and I fished coast to coast here in the United States, every body of water you can imagine. I fished all the Great Lakes. I fished all the roughest, bodies of water in the country. And I've got a lot of experience fishing in driving a boat in rough water. And I'm going to give you guys some tips and advice on this that you don't hear in a lot of different places. Now, first of all, when you're talking about driving a boat in rough water, you got to quantify that a little bit, because there's a couple different considerations. Number one is just the safety of driving your boat in rough water, because there's a difference between rough, dangerous water and just rough, uncomfortable water. So at some point it becomes dangerous if you don't know what you're doing in really rough water. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But the other factor is just your passenger and your driver comfort when you're driving. Not only comfort, but ensuring that you don't hurt yourself, your neck and your back. And like I said, I've been in rough water my whole life, and I've got some residual issues back and neck that are fairly minor considering my age and how much rough water I've been in. And I think that's contributed to a lot about what I'm going to share with you guys today as far as how to drive a boat in rough water. So let's talk a little bit about the types of rough water that you have. Now, the rough water in a lake, it's created by a couple different things. The main thing to consider when you're determining how rough it is in a boat is the distance between the waves and the relative height. So let's say, for example, if you're fishing in the Great Lakes, I have been in some monster waves on the Great Lakes. I mean, I've been in waves, guys, that I guarantee were 10 to 12 foot tall. I mean, it's hard to measure them, but when you're down in the bottom of one and you look up and it's like taller than, a tall ceiling in a house, it's monstrous. It's like being in a bass boat in the ocean, which I have been in the ocean in my bass boat several times too. But the situation you have here is a lot of people think, well, God, Randy, how in the world can you be out in a 10-foot waves in a bass boat in the Great Lakes? That's some of the easiest driving there is, because in the Great Lakes, for the most part, the waves are spaced farther apart. So you can actually just, go up and down and surf them, and, you can navigate them because the distance is apart. But the problem that you have is when you get those high sustained winds that are generated from like a straight line winds that are just like straight at 35 to like 50 miles an hour. And on certain lakes, the waves will get shorter. They may only get 4, 5, 6 feet tall, which are still tall waves, but they're tighter together. Those are the dangerous waves. Those are the most dangerous waves. We've talked about this before, guys. I did a video on this, I think about 3 years ago, but we've got 80,000 more people on the channel, so I wanted to go over this along with some more stuff. But I have fished Lake Huron, I fished Lake St. Clair, I fished Lake Erie, I've fished Lake Ontario, Champlain, all the giant bodies of water. And I've been in big waves in those. I've been in every one of those lakes. I've been in 6 to 10, 12 foot waves at times when that wind was sort of blowing. But the most dangerous situation I have ever been in my life was at Lake Murray in South Carolina, which you wouldn't think. It's at Lake Murray it's like a 40,000 acre lake. It's not real big, but the way that lake set up and the way that it funneled north to south. I was there one time. We had one of those straight line freakish wind days where the wind was blowing like 40, 50, 60 miles an hour sustained out of the north. And the waves on Lake Murray during this time, they were the shortest, biggest waves I've ever seen in my life. They were probably like 4 to 6 foot waves, but the wind was blowing so hard that they were breaking over the top, and they were short, and you couldn't navigate them hardly. It was extremely dangerous. I mean, I basically had to idle through these things. So, and then you have everything in between with that. So let's talk a little bit about, the encompassing thing and some things you can do as far as driving the boat in rough water. The first thing that you have to do, guys, now I've talked about this before, and I will argue it, to the end of the earth about this, and most all of the expert rough riding boat drivers I've ever met agree with me on this. Do not use a Hotfoot. I think a Hotfoot is the most worthless piece of equipment you could possibly have in a boat, because the Hotfoot, what happens is that you are relegated to sitting down on your butt when you're driving that thing. And in rough water, I always ride on my knee. It's like I will take, if I can show you guys what I'm talking about here, is I'll sit like this. You can see, or maybe even like this in the boat, where I'm riding on my knee. And by doing that, like you're in your driver's seat and you're up on your knee, number one, that allows you to use your legs to absorb the shock. When you're coming down on a rough piece of water, you can use that leg to like stand up and absorb it a little bit. And on top of that, it lifts you higher up above the seat so you can see above those big waves. Now, if you're sitting down on your butt, you don't have the visual ability to see over some of those waves. And also your spine takes all of the pressure. If you happen to come down hard and flat on a wave, your spine takes everything. And if you're up on your knee, you can, like I said, it's almost like a shock absorber. That is so huge, I can't even tell you. And you can just control the boat better. When you are riding on one knee, you've got your left hand on the steering wheel, you got your right hand on the throttle. You can adjust to different type of positions and different type of speeds better with the throttle than you can with the foot pedal, because everything together works with that. Your visual accruement, the ability to be up higher in the seat, it all works better. And people say, "Oh, Randy, you know what you're talking about. You need two hands on your wheel." No, you don't. You do not. You need, unless you're disabled and you've got a strong hand or just an average hand, hydraulic steering, you don't need it. You can do everything with one hand. I have driven like that my entire career, guys, and I've never had one single incident. And I can promise you, I've been in more rough water than 99.9% of the people out there, unless you're a guide on Lake Erie or something. I have been out there more than you guys have. I know what I'm talking about with this. Get rid of that damn Hotfoot. It's worthless. That's the number one piece of advice I'll give you. Number two is you've got to adjust your speed accordingly, which means slowing down. Now, one of the biggest mistake that anyone makes in rough water, besides reading the waves, we'll talk here in a second, is they're simply driving too fast. And relative to how you operate your trim switch with that. Now, how your trim switch is operated is all relative to the height and the distance of the wave, because you want to use your V-bow as much as you can to cut the waves, unless the waves are positioned and large enough to where you need a little bit of lift on it and you don't really need that V to cut through it. Sometimes you need a little bit of lift on that front end so you won't spear the next wave. But it's a fine line between having lift and allowing that bow to cut in. So that's sort of something that requires practice with it. But the main thing, I see more people having issues in rough water, two things. They're trimming their motor out too much and they're going a little too fast. Now, one of the things about a bass boat is people don't realize how giant of waves a bass boat will handle if you learn how to plow. If you plow, and what I mean about plowing, if you on a bass boat, if you go like 12 to 15 miles an hour where you're not on plane, where you're plowing like that, if you're plowing where you're not on plane, but you're not idling, you're going like that, guys, a bass boat will handle a giant wave. That is the way to run the biggest, roughest waves, is by plowing through them like that. And now, on rare situations, yeah, you can actually get up on plane and run through the troughs and all that type of stuff. But when it comes to big waves, they're tight together. If you plow like that, it keeps your bow super high, and also it takes your entire boat bottom, the V and the bottom, is absorbing everything. It's the smoothest, safest ride that you can have. But a lot of people don't want to plow because it's a little bit slower. And you have got to learn to slow down. If you're one of those guys that just cannot slow down, you're never going to be a good driver in rough water. Now, the second thing with that, besides slowing down, because slowing down will keep you from making a lot of mistakes. But one of the most critical elements besides slowing down is you've got to be able to read the waves. You've got to be able to see the directions they're coming. You've got to be able to read the wind and the current with it. And then you have to decide on how to tack or how to approach that wave. Now, every wave's different. It's like when you're trying to go in a certain direction, you have to consider the distance between that wave and the height of that wave, because sometimes you can go straight into them and you can just sort of bump and plow through them, and it's not uncomfortable. It's pretty small like that. Sometimes they're too big, you can't do that, and you have to run at a 45-degree angle where you got the waves coming. Here's your boat, and you got the waves coming like this. Instead of taking that wave head on, sometimes you have to go sideways and you go up and over the side of a wave like that, sort of like a roller coaster. That's not a common situation, because the only lakes that you're really going to find that in are like the Great Lakes. For the most part, in rough water, if you fish a man-made lake, the type of situation you're going to experience in rough water in a man-made lake are those 3 to 4 to possibly 6 foot waves that are a little bit tighter together. So from that standpoint, most of the time you're either going into them or you're going with them. You can go sideways a little bit, but it all depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Now, so when you're talking about how to tack a wave, you have to decide, okay, is there a real safety issue here? Is there a safety issue that I might spear one of these waves, flood the boat full of water, and it's cold out and get hypothermia and die? That's one situation. And then another situation is you just don't want to like have a chance to like break something on your boat by pounding hard and hitting so hard, or injuring your back or injuring your partner's back. That's the second one. And the third one, sometimes you just don't want to get wet. It may not be dangerous. It may not be like super uncomfortable, but it's windy and it's rough. And if you don't hit those waves right, you're going to get soaked with spray. We've all been there on that if you've been with a boat or not. So each one of those elements require you to tack a different angle into the water. Sometimes it's head on, sometimes it's a 45, sometimes it's at a 90-degree angle. It just totally depends. But always opt for the smoothest ride with that. Another thing you can do with that is read the lake. It's like most every single time every lake out there, if it's rough, there are parts of the lake you can get out of it just a little bit. So sometimes it may be better for you guys to like go out in the roughest part of the lake, get wet for a little bit in order to get to the other side of the lake where it might be smoother, and then take off. So try to see and determine the way the lake's laying in relative to how the direction of the wind. And there's usually always a part of the lake that will be a little bit less rough, with that. But the main thing, guys, is just if out of all the mistakes that I see people make when they're in rough water, it's just that they're driving too fast and they got their motor trimmed too high. That's the two biggest mistakes that people make. I've watched over and over again. Well, I can tell you this one story. We were fishing a tournament at Lake Erie, and we were going out of the mouth of the Detroit River. It was an FLW tournament, and I was fishing out by Pelee Island out there, which is probably about I don't know, it's about a 20-25 mile run out into Lake Erie. And it was pretty rough that morning. We took off, and it was one of those type of deals where the wind was blowing, 10, 12. And then once you get out into the lake, it's sort of like its own weather system, and the wind picked up. And so the wind at this point is blowing like 15, 18 miles an hour, which if you have a 15, 18 mile an hour wind on Lake Erie, it gets rough. I mean, you got 5 or 6 foot waves out there. So we were on the way the wind was blowing. I was running to Pelee Island, and I was going with the waves, and I was going, they were 5, 6, maybe 7 foot waves. And I was just taking my time. I looked at my speedometer, and I was going, I think 12 miles an hour. So I'm just like plowing over. I'm just taking my time. It's nice and quiet because you're going about the same speed as the wave. And I'm talking to my partner, and we're staying dry. And all of a sudden there's about 3 or 4 boats that decided, they're gonna speed it up and try to get to Pelee Island before I do. So I looked over in the distance off to my right, and there's like 3 boats over there that are trying. I can tell they're pushing it too hard. It's like, you can't push it that hard when you're going with a big wave. And so I watched them for about a half mile once they got, into my view. And sure enough, guys, every one of those guys stuffed a wave in front of them, and they were dead in the water out there. They had filled their boat with water, and they had to sit out there and bilge it out. That is a prime example of just guys that are going too fast. That's all there is to it. So you can solve a lot of problems that you have by just slowing down in that rough water. So main thing, guys, learn to read the water, learn to read the direction of the waves. Get rid of that damn Hotfoot. It's worthless in your boat. Take it out and sell it on eBay, and then slow down. You do those 3 things right there, and you'll be fine in big water, and be surprised how smooth and dry it can be riding in giant waves. So hope it helps out. We'll talk later.